of Barbados, which went out with a commission but was converted to a pirate. He told the purser he was his prisoner, and must answer the damage done to two merchants who were slaving. The purser answered that he was not commander, that the captain was a hot rash youth, put into business by his friends, which he did not understand. But however, satisfaction should be made. He was carried by Collins on board Booth's ship, where, at first, he was talked to in pretty strong terms, but after a while very civilly used, and the next morning sent up to the king with a guide, and peace made for him. The king allowed them trade, and sent down the usual presents, a couple of oxen between 20 and 30 people laden with rice, and as many more with the country liquor called toke. The captain then settled the factory on the shore side, and began to buy slaves and provisions. The pirates were among them, and had opportunities of sounding the men, and knowing in what posture the ship lay, they found by one human, belonging to the speaker, that there were not above 40 men on board, and that they had lost the second mate and 20 hands in the longboat, on the coast, before they came into this harbor, but that they kept a good lookout, and had their guns ready primed. However, he, for 100 pounds, undertook to wet all the priming, and assist in taking the ship. After some days the captain of the speaker came on shore, and was received with great civility by the heads of the pirates, having agreed before to make satisfaction. In a day or two after, he was invited by them to eat a barbecued shoat, which invitation he accepted. After dinner Captain Bowen, who was, I have already said, a prisoner on board the French pirate, but now become one of the fraternity, and master of the Grab, went out and returned with a case of pistols in his hand, and told the captain of the speaker, whose name I won't mention, that he was his prisoner. He asked, upon what account? Bowen answered, they wanted his ship, his was a good one, and they were resolved to have her, to make amends for the damage he had done them. In the meanwhile his boat's crew and the rest of the men ashore were told by others of the pirates, who were drinking with them, that they were also prisoners. Some of them answered, zounds, we don't trouble our heads what we are, let's have t'other bowl of punch. A watchword was given, and no boat to be admitted on the ship. This word, which was for that night, Coventry, was known to them. At 8 o'clock they manned the 12-oared boat, and the one they found at Mayotta with 24 men, and set out for the ship. When they were put off, the captain of the speaker desired them to come back, as they wanted to speak with them. Captain Booth asked what he wanted. He said, they could never take his ship. Then, said Booth, we'll die in or alongside of her. But, replied the captain, if you will go with safety, don't board on the larboard side, for there is a gun out of the steerage loaded with partridge, which will clear the docks. They thanked him, and proceeded. When they were near the ship they were hailed, and the answer was, the Coventry. All well, said the mate, get the lights over the side. But spying the second boat, he asked what boat that was. One answered it was a raft of water, another that it was a boat of beef. This disagreement in the answers made the mate suspicious, who cried out, pirates, take your arms, my lads, and immediately clapped a match to a gun, which, as the primary was before wet by the treachery of Human, only fizzed. They boarded in the instant, and made themselves masters of her, without the loss of a man on either side. The next day they put necessary provisions on board the French-built ship, and gave her to the captain of the speaker, and those men who would go off with him, among whom was man, who had betrayed his ship, for the pirates had both paid him the 100 I agreed, and kept his secret. The captain having thus lost his ship, sailed in that which the pirates gave him, for Johanna, where he fell ill and died with grief. The pirates having here victualled, they sailed for the bay of St. Augustine, where they took in between 70 and 80 men, who had belonged to the ship Alexander, commanded by Captain James, a pirate. They also took up her guns, and mounted the speaker with 54, which made up their number, and 240 men, besides slaves, of which they had about 20. From hence they sailed for the East Indies, but they stopped at Zanzibar for fresh provisions, where the Portuguese had once a settlement, but now inhabited by Arabians. Some of them went ashore with the captain to buy provisions. The captain was sent for by the governor, who went with about 14 in company. They passed through the guard, and where they had entered the governor's house, they were all cut off, and, at the same time, others who were in different houses in the town were set upon, which made them fly to the shore. The longboat, which lay off a grappling, was immediately put in by those who looked after her, where there were not above half a dozen of the pirates who brought their arms ashore, but they piled them so well, for they were in the boat, that most of the men got into her. The quartermaster ran down sword in hand, and though he was attacked by many, he behaved himself so well, that he got into a little canoe, put off, and reached the longboat. In the interim, the little fort the Arabians had played upon the ship, which returned the salute very warmly. Thus they got on board, with the loss of Captain Booth and 20 men, and set sail for the East Indies. When they were under sail, they went to voting for a new captain, and the quartermaster, who had behaved so well in the last affair with the Arabians, was chosen. But he declining all command, the crew made choice of Bowen for captain, Pickering to succeed him as master, Samuel Herot, a Frenchman, for quartermaster, and Nathaniel North for captain quartermaster. Things being thus settled, they came to the mouth of the Red Sea, and fell in with 13 sail of Moorish ships, which they kept company with the greater part of the day, but afraid to venture on them, as they took them for Portuguese men of war, at length part were for boarding, and advised it. The captain, though he said little, did not seem inclined, for he was but a young pirate, though an old commander of a merchantman. Those who pushed for boarding then desired Captain Boorman, already mentioned, to take the command, but he said he would not be an usurper, that nobody was more fit for it than he who had it, that for his part he would stand by his foozle, and went forward to the forecastle with such as would have him take the command, to be ready to board, on which the captain's quartermaster said, if they were resolved to engage, their captain, whose representative he was, did not want resolution, therefore ordered them to get their tacks on board, for they had already made a clear ship, and get ready for boarding, which they accordingly did, and coming up with the sternmost ship, they fired a broadside into her, which killed 2 Moors, clapped her on board and carried her, but night coming on, they made only this prize, which yielded them £500 per man. From hence they sailed to the coast of Malabar. The adventures of these pirates on this coast are already set down in Captain Bowen's life, to which I refer the reader, and shall only observe, that Captain White was all this time before the mast, being a forced man from the beginning. Bowen's crew dispersing, Captain White went to Methelage, where he lived ashore with the king, not having an opportunity of getting off the island till another pirate ship, called the Prosperous, commanded by one Howard, who had been bred a lighterman on the river Thames, came in. This ship was taken at Augustine by some pirates from shore, and the crew of their longboat, which joined them, at the instigation of one Ranton, boatswain mate, who sent for water. They came on board in the night and surprised her, though not without resistance, in which the captain and chief mate were killed, and several others wounded. Those who were ashore with Captain White, resolving to enter in this ship, determined him to go also, rather than be left alone with the natives, hoping, by some accident or other, to have an opportunity of returning home. He continued on board the ship, in which he was made quartermaster, till they met with, and all went on board of Bowen, as is set down in his life, in which ship he continued after Bowen left them. At Port Dolphin he went off in the boats to fetch some of the crew ashore, the ship being blown to sea the night before, the ship not being able to get in, and he supposing her gone to the west side of the island, as they had formerly proposed, he steered that course in the boat with 26 men. They touched at Augustine, expecting the ship, but she not appearing in a week, the time they waited, the king ordered them to be gone, telling them they imposed on him with lies, for he did not believe they had any ship. However, he gave them fresh provision. They took in water, and made for Methelage. Here, as Captain White was known to the king, they were kindly received, and stayed about a fortnight in expectation of the ship. But she not appearing, they raised their boat a streak, salted the provision the king gave them, put water aboard, and stood for the north end of the island, designing to go around, believing their ship might be at the island of St. Mary. When they came to the north end, the current, which sets to the northwest for 8 months in the year, was so strong they found it impossible to get round. Wherefore they got into a harbour, of which there are many for small vessels. Here they stayed about 3 weeks or a month, when part of the crew were for burning the boat, and travelling over land to a black king of their acquaintance, whose name was Reberembo, who lived at a place called Manangoromazai, in latitude 15 degrees, or thereabouts. As this king had been several times assisted by whites in his wars, he was a great friend to them. Captain White dissuaded them from his undertaking, and with much ado saved the boat. But one half of the men being resolved to go by land, they took what provisions they thought necessary, and set out. Captain White, and those who stayed with him, conveyed them a day's journey, and then returning, he got into the boat with his companions, and went back to Methelage, fearing these men might return, prevail with the rest, and burn the boat. Here he built a deck on his boat, and lay by 3 months, in which time there came in 3 pirates with a boat, who had formerly been trepanned on board the Severn and Scarborough men of war, which had been looking for pirates on the east side, from which ships they made their escape at Mohila, in a small canoe to Johanna, and from Johanna to Mayotta, where the king built them the boat which brought them to Methelage. The time of the current setting with violence to the northwest being over, they proceeded together in White's boat, burning that of Mayotta, to the north end, where the current running yet too strong to get around, they went into a harbour and stayed there a month, maintaining themselves with fish and wild hogs, of which there was a great plenty. At length, having fine weather, and the strength of the current abating, they got round, and after sailing about 40 miles on the east side,